A genius scientist accidentally found himself locked out of his own life and was reborn in the Joseon era, traveling back hundreds of years through space and time. Fortunately, in his new life he was born as the crown prince of the Joseon Dynasty, one of the most famous kingdoms in Korean history. In this new world, he disrupted the established order by using knowledge from the future to reform his country. This is the premise of Black Corporation Joseon. Finally, all the opponents of the crown prince had been exiled. Now the crown prince's wishes were proceeding smoothly. Spring had arrived. May goodness and prosperity always be bestowed upon the nation of Joseon. We return to the main hall. The king is seated on his throne. He looks around and says, "It seems everyone is present. I have a major announcement to make today." The ministers exchange glances. They are curious about the announcement His Majesty is about to deliver. Some of them suspect it is one of the crown prince's ideas. They wonder, can the jump rope method really change someone that much? Amid the ministers' unease, the king suddenly speaks loudly, "I plan to carry out a massive reform." The ministers are shocked. Hyang, the crown prince, shows a worried expression. In his heart he thinks, finally it begins. A few weeks ago Hyang was sound asleep in his room. Suddenly a voice was heard, "Hyang, are you asleep?" In his heart he wondered, is that father's voice? He woke up and sat on the bed, then replied, "Not yet, please come in." However, his father answered from outside, "No need. I just need the chart you used during the presentation." Hyang replied, "The chart is on the desk. You can take it." The king then instructed his eunuch to retrieve the chart. After obtaining it, the king said, "I'll be going. You should sleep now." Hyang yawned and thought to himself, "What's going on at this late hour? I'm already so sleepy." That night, Hyang had no idea that the king's visit would bring him major trouble. The next day the king visited Hyang again. "Hyang, there's a part of your chart I don't understand. Can you explain it?" Hyang nodded and said, "Of course, please come in." But this incident didn't happen just once. The next day the king came again. "Hyang, after thinking about it, there's something in the chart you made?" The day after that the king came again. And so it continued. Every day the king would discuss the chart. Hyang began to feel disturbed. His sleep was no longer peaceful. One night, the king returned to his room. Hyang thought to himself, this man? Isn't he tired? It's already 1 in the morning. But his eyes only grow brighter the more we talk. Suddenly the king said, "It seems you don't understand. Here, let me explain it again." Hyang was startled and quickly replied, "No, I understand perfectly." The king smiled and said, "Good. I'm very pleased to have such a wise son." Hyang sighed and replied, "I'm glad if you're glad." Back to the main hall. The king stood before the ministers. He held up a book titled Joseon Reformation Plan. "I want you all to examine it carefully," said the king. "Identify the problems we can solve and find ways to improve this system. If you have a better plan, report it directly to me. This is the Sejong Reformation." The ministers whispered among themselves. The king continued his explanation. "The first reform is the reorganization of the central government. Geoffrey has created a new administrative model. Starting with the 6 ministries, we have designed a more effective implementation procedure. The second reform is the restructuring of local administration. The Gyeonggi province will be divided into 5 regions. Gyeonggi province will become 7 and Gangwon will become 5. Each region will organize its own local administration. And lastly, but no less important, the scene shifts. The king and Hyang walk side by side in the palace corridor. The king begins, "Crown Prince, let's discuss commercialization and industry today." Hyang is surprised. "Now," he asks. The king nods. "I just thought of something during our morning exercise earlier." Hyang is curious. "What is it, father?" The king explains clearly, "During your presentation you didn't mention this. But in your chart, it's written that through commercialization and industry, not only will Joseon's economic power increase, but so will the king's authority." Hyang thinks for a moment, then asks, "I understand that the economy can grow. But how does this strengthen the king's power?" The king looks at Hyang, waiting for an answer. Hyang then says, "The logic is simple. Agriculture is the main source of wealth for officials and nobles. If the royal court supports the development of commercialization and industry, we can create more wealth. This will increase the influence of the royal court and ultimately strengthen the king's power. The king nods but then asks again, but in the end, won't the officials and nobles also buy goods from merchants? They are the main consumers. If this happens, won't they also grow richer and more powerful? Yang smiles. Father, look at the bigger picture. The king listens attentively. Yang continues, if we generate wealth through the royal family's production and trade, we can free ourselves from the limitations of land. Officials and nobles may be wealthy, but they are still confined to their lands. Meanwhile, the royal court can grow faster by leveraging broader trade. The king smiles with satisfaction. Now I understand. Thank you, my son. You are truly as wise as I had hoped. However, the king suddenly asks again, but what about capital? To start a business we need capital. The problem is, most of the wealth is currently in the hands of the nobles. If merchants borrow money from them, wouldn't that make the nobles even richer and more powerful, not the king? Yang smiles slightly. That's just one method, father. We can attract merchants to us. The source of credit doesn't have to come from officials and nobles, but from the royal court itself. At that moment, Yang suddenly remembers the modern world before he was reborn into the past. In the 21st century, he thinks, national banks are institutions created by the government to achieve specific goals. Their largest investors are the state, not individuals. With enthusiasm, Yang begins to explain to the king about the modern banking system in his mind. He speaks at length about how the state can take on the role of the primary lender, not the nobles. The king listens intently. The next day, the king confidently proposes the idea of a national bank as the final reform in his reformation plan. As a result of this massive reform, the need for more officials increases. The royal court begins searching for talented individuals to fill various important positions. The king then issues a new order: we must review our education policy. Everyone, even commoners, must have the right to a minimum education so they can become part of the new government system. This reform is carried out very carefully. The king sends investigators to various regions to observe its impact. However, as expected, problems begin to arise from all directions. In the early stages of implementation, the reform takes a long time to be fully applied. It is estimated that it will take 15 years for this policy to be enforced throughout Joseon. In the distant future, historians will refer to this period as the Year of the Dragon's Reformation. In a long corridor, the king and Hyang walk side by side. The king looks at his son with pride and says, "Thank you, Hyang. This will take a long time, but because of you, the lives of our people will become more prosperous than ever before." Hyang smiles. They finally arrive at their destination. Hyang looks around and says, "Father, wouldn't it be better if I worked with the scholars? I think you don't need to handle everything yourself." The king shakes his head. This is for the good of Joseon. How can its king not understand what is best for his people? He pats Hyang's shoulder and looks at him seriously. "What do you think is better?" asks the king. "Understanding something through direct experience or just hearing about it and drawing conclusions?" Hyang falls silent. The king continues, "I don't want to be a king who only signs documents without understanding their contents. I must see the conditions on the ground myself. I don't want to just hear reports from my throne." He smiles. "Come, let's go in now." Yang looks at his father with pride. In his heart he says, "As I expected. No matter how much I know about the future, there's one thing I can't surpass. The person standing before me is the true king of Joseon." King's arrival at Hyang's place. This sudden visit surprises Hyang. He says, "Father, you're here?" The king replies, "Yes. I was looking at your charts again and found something that made me curious." Hyang responds, "Father, I want to rest. Please give me some time to rest without having to think about those charts." The king laughs and says, "Ha, you little rascal. But this time it's different from your reform plans. During your presentation you mentioned several policies. But I couldn't help but notice, you didn't say anything about the military. Don't tell me you forgot about it?" Hyang smirks slyly and replies, "If I mention the military, it would cause an even bigger uproar. What do you think about the current state of our military, father? The king strokes his chin thoughtfully. In my opinion, our military system is still unstable. The country remains in turmoil. We need to invest in wealth and human resources to handle any potential threats to Joseon. What do you think? I agree, father, Yang says. We need to strengthen our navy. The king looks surprised. The navy? Why? Yang explains, Joseon lacks a capable naval force to control its waters. During the Tsushima Island expedition a few years ago, more than half of our forces were untrained farmers. On top of that, our ships are too small. Our people had to risk their lives just to cross the waters between Busan and Tsushima Island. The king nods slowly. You're right. We need to increase ship production and significantly boost our naval forces. I agree, Yang responds. The king furrows his brow. But the budget will be a major challenge. Yang smiles. I have a suggestion to solve the budget issue. The king looks at him with curiosity. What is it? We can dig rocks, Yang answers. The king is taken aback. Dig rocks? How can that generate funds? Sometime later, an announcement is spread throughout the kingdom, ordering mining experts to gather at the Ministry of Commerce. The public responds with curiosity and confusion. What is mining? Asks one villager. It's digging up rocks, isn't it? Another replies. Why are we suddenly being asked to dig rocks? Is there gold somewhere? Someone else wonders. Meanwhile, the king addresses his ministers. The first step we must take is to secure capital. We need gold, silver, and bronze. Any additions? One of the ministers replies, that seems sufficient. In the corner of the room, Yang thinks to himself, if I want to pursue my hobby, I'll need more than that. Then he speaks up. Father, we also need iron, sulfur, limestone, and coal. The king looks puzzled. Coal? What's that? Yang explains, coal is a rock formed from dead plants buried for thousands of years. It burns more efficiently and faster than wood. If we replace wood with coal, we can prevent reckless deforestation. The king nods. Really? That's a good idea. But what about limestone? Why do we need that? Limestone is essential for construction and iron smelting, Yang replies. The king looks even more bewildered. How can limestone be used in construction? Yang gives a faint smile. I'm sorry, father, but that requires more research. However, limestone is a common mineral we can easily find. Deep inside, Yang thinks, iron, coal, and cement are the keys to the Industrial Revolution. Without them, technological advancement will never be possible. Then, one of the ministers spoke up, Your Majesty, I apologize. We don't have any sulfur deposits in Joseon. Until now, we've been importing sulfur from Wakoku. Yang responded, but we can't be certain that we don't have any, right? Perhaps we just haven't found it yet. Sulfur isn't only found in Wakoku, it's also abundant in the Ming Empire. It doesn't make sense that sulfur is completely absent from our land. Maybe it's just harder to locate. He continued, sulfur is crucial, especially for producing gunpowder. Gunpowder is a key material for national defense. If we continue to rely on other countries to obtain it, this could become a major problem in the future. The king immediately became enthusiastic. You're right. You're absolutely right, Crown Prince. Let's go find that sulfur. Another minister added, it would be wise to instruct the miners to be more thorough in their search for sulfur during their excavations. Yang smiled in satisfaction, thinking to himself, as I expected, it's much easier when I mention national defense. Following the meeting, skilled miners from all 8 provinces of Joseon were gathered in the capital, Hanyang. King Sejong then established a new organization called the Resource Agency under the Ministry of Commerce to manage the miners. Out in the field, a minister stood before the assembled miners. Your task is to travel across Joseon and search for the minerals listed here. If you work hard, you will be handsomely rewarded. Give it your best. The miners responded in unison, We'll do our best. Shortly afterward, the king himself arrived at the site. The miners immediately bowed low to the ground and shouted, These lowly beings greet your majesty. The king smiled at the greeting. Don't belittle yourselves. The work you're doing is of the utmost importance. The prosperity and strength of our nation depend on your hard work. So, I hope you'll give it your all." With renewed enthusiasm, they responded, "We will do our best, Your Majesty." The minister then handed out the mineral lists. "Study these lists carefully. Make sure you don't miss anything," he instructed. The miners examined the lists with great care. One miner asked, "What is coal?" His companion replied, "I've heard of it before. It's a solid black rock that can burn." The first miner shook his head in disbelief. "A rock that can burn? That's strange." He continued reading until his eyes landed on the word sulfur. He asked, "Do we even have sulfur in Joseon?" His companion pointed to a small note at the bottom of the list. "Look here. It says, immediately report if you find a shiny black rock resembling obsidian but brittle. It's called graphite." The miners looked at each other in confusion. They had never seen such a stone before. But their determination remained strong as they set off to find the listed minerals. A few days later, Hyang inspected the mining results delivered in a cart. He smiled with satisfaction. "Excellent. They're doing great. The foundation is set." Suddenly, a eunuch approached and said, "Your Highness, the envoy from the Ming Empire has returned." Yang turned his head. "Oh, they're back already?" Not long after, the envoys arrived, presenting a gift from the Ming Empire. They handed a map to the king. The king stared at the map in surprise. "What kind of map is this?" "All right, we've reached the end of this chapter. What kind of map has appeared before the king? Could this map lead them on an exciting journey into the future?" Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. In the king's hall, a table filled with books and papers was placed in the center of the room. A messenger stepped forward and announced, "This is a gift, Your Majesty." One of the ministers stepped forward to inspect the items. He was stunned by what he saw. Above them, King Sejong held a large sheet of paper. He furrowed his brow deep in thought. What exactly is this map? He glanced at the documents before him and asked, "Hyang, what are all these books and maps?" Hyang immediately responded, "I made a special request to the delegation leader. These items are crucial for governance. These are state records and maps from Zheng He's grand expeditions." The Minister of Revenue spoke up. "I have also heard of Zheng He. He was a eunuch under Emperor Yongle. It is said that he led vast expeditions to explore the seas at the emperor's command. Zheng He was a highly respected eunuch of the Ming Empire, even in modern China. He explored regions now known as Southeast Asia and Africa." King Sejong realized that he had heard the name before. However, he still did not understand how these maritime records were relevant to running the nation. Hyang lifted the map in front of his father. "Look at this. This map is worth 1,000 pieces of gold." As he spoke, his father and the ministers stared at him with confused expressions. Seeing their faces, Hyang's expression darkened with frustration. He continued to explain. "Do you remember the issue with buffalo horn imports?" he asked. The Minister of Revenue repeated slowly, "Buffalo horns?" He seemed to be trying to recall something. Hyang continued, "Buffalo horn is an essential material for making bows. Joseon lacks this resource, so we have to import it from the Ming Dynasty. However, they only provide it when we send tribute. That is incredibly inconvenient, isn't it? Of course, the Ming Dynasty isn't the only one with buffalo horns. I've heard that Viet and Siam have abundant supplies as well." The ministers listened intently. "We've never traded with them," Hyang continued. "The reason is simple. We don't know how to reach them." The ministers were taken aback. Hyang felt more confident. He spoke passionately. "If we use this map as a guide, we can reach those countries. If that happens, we can establish trade deals without wasting unnecessary resources." King Sejong stroked his chin. He looked amazed. Without realizing it, he raised his thumb, a gesture he had recently learned from Hyang. Seeing the king's odd action, a minister asked, "Your Majesty, what does that mean?" The king laughed and replied, "It means you're the best. The crown prince taught me this not long ago." Hyang, standing beside the minister, was at a loss for words. He could only offer a cold smile. Deep down, he regretted teaching the king such a strange gesture. Suddenly, King Sejong turned to Hyang. But Crown Prince, I'm still puzzled about one thing. There's no way the Ming Emperor would hand over this information so easily. What trick did you use? At the word trick, Hyang's face darkened. He felt uneasy. Alright, he thought. We'll have to go back a little in time to explain this. At that time, a diplomatic mission from Joseon was visiting Emperor Yongle, the third emperor of the Ming Dynasty. The emperor sat on his throne, gazing at the envoys. You have traveled far to get here. It must have been exhausting, he said. The envoys responded in unison, Your Majesty, your kindness is beyond measure. The emperor admired the bird cage presented as tribute. He could not help but praise it. The tribute you bring is truly valuable. As I expected, the falcons of Joseon are elegant. He could not take his eyes off the bird inside the cage. Its feathers were magnificent, exuding a regal aura. The falcon seemed to fit the imperial atmosphere perfectly. The emperor was delighted to receive such a gift. As a gesture of goodwill, he decided to offer a gift in return. What does Joseon desire? He asked. One of the envoys stepped forward. Your Majesty, we would like sulfur and copper, he answered. The emperor immediately instructed his ministers to negotiate with the envoys. He wanted to provide a reasonable amount. Then he asked again, Is there anything else you desire? The envoy hesitated for a moment. Then carefully he said, Forgive me, Your Majesty, but we also hope you would grant us the records of Zheng He's voyages. The emperor raised an eyebrow. The records of his explorations? Why does Joseon want them? The emperor's expression grew serious. After a brief silence, the envoys began speaking, carefully choosing their words. Their smiles were bright, their admiration evident. They showered him with praises, hoping to secure the valuable records. Joseon is merely a small country in a remote corner of the world, one of the envoys said. We truly have no idea how vast this world is. But thanks to Your Majesty, our humble nation has learned that the world is filled with many countries. We are deeply grateful. Another envoy added, We have also heard that Zheng He was sent by Your Majesty to spread the greatness of the Ming Dynasty across the world. The emperor's smile widened at the flattery. The Joseon envoys continued, Our small nation has only just realized how immense the world truly is. Yet all this time we have been isolated, unable to grasp the grandeur of the world. Therefore, we humbly request a copy of these voyage records so that we may witness the greatness of the Ming Dynasty. The imperial officials nearly gagged at the endless stream of compliments. Yet, the Joseon envoys did not stop. They closed with one final plea. We sincerely hope that Your Majesty will allow us to witness your magnificence. Yang finished his story. That's how they got it, father? King Sejong fell silent. He didn't know what to say. With mere words of flattery, the Ming Emperor had willingly handed over something so valuable. The envoys had truly worked hard. After a moment, King Sejong spoke. But I'm still curious. No matter how much we praise them, why would they give away something so precious? Could they have had a hidden motive? One of the ministers looked uneasy as if he had just realized something. Your Majesty, there is something strange about these records. King Sejong turned to him. What do you mean? The minister picked up the document from the table with a serious expression. This isn't a copy. This is the original document. The ministers were shocked. How could the original records be here? Was this a mistake? Or was it something that could lead to trouble in the future? The minister opened the document and flipped through its pages. Suddenly, a letter slipped out and fell to the floor. He quickly picked it up. Your Majesty, there is a letter inside. The king reached out his hand. Give it to me. With a slight tremor, the minister handed him the letter. The king skimmed through it and shook his head. I don't understand. Yang lifted his head. Father, may I read it? The king gestured for a eunuch to pass the letter to Hyang. Hyang unfolded it and read aloud. This document has been delivered through official channels. Therefore, there is no need to question or investigate its origins. Yang fell silent. In his mind, he pictured someone from the Ming Dynasty casually handing over the document while saying, Just take it. Don't ask questions. The scene felt so vivid in his imagination. Yang looked up and met his father's gaze. Father, It seems the Ming Dynasty truly wanted us to have this. The king still looked doubtful. What do you mean? Yang recalled a lesson from his past life. In his mind, he could hear the faint voice of his teacher explaining in front of a blackboard. Do you know why the Ming Dynasty's emperor launched Zheng He's expeditions? To understand this, we must first examine how Emperor Yongle ascended the throne. He seized power through a coup. Because of that, he lacked a strong foundation. He needed a grand achievement to legitimize his rule. The great expeditions were one of his strategies. But why weren't these expeditions repeated in the 15th century? After all, at that time, Asia was far more advanced in exploration than Europe. The answer lies in their trade system. They weren't truly engaged in commerce. They operated on a tribute system. In this system, a nation that paid tribute would receive gifts in return. However, tribute trade with distant countries was not profitable. If their ships were damaged or lost, they had to rebuild them at great expense. After Emperor Yongle's death, all records of the expeditions were erased. The Ming Dynasty did not want future rulers to repeat the same mistake. The Minister of Public Works spoke up. Your Majesty, if they needed so much wealth to sustain those expeditions, wouldn't it be wiser for us not to follow in their footsteps? Yang smirked slightly. No. Because our situation is different from that of the Ming Dynasty. The king was intrigued. What makes us different? Yang replied, the difference lies in our trade system. They operated on a tribute and reward system. But we can adopt a bilateral trade model. The officials exchanged glances. Everyone in the court looked puzzled. Once again, Yang was introducing a new concept. He smiled and began explaining, instead of following the Ming Dynasty's approach, we can develop bilateral trade. The ministers began murmuring. What is bilateral trade? Yang continued, it is the opposite of the Ming Dynasty's trade model, which relies on tributes and gifts. Instead, we can exchange essential goods between nations. The king wanted to know more. He requested a more detailed explanation. Yang explained, simply put, we will operate based on trade principles. The court will handle transportation and ensure the safety of merchants. In return, we will collect taxes and fees. This way we can keep trade profitable. We can also import essential goods at a lower cost while maintaining price control. King Sejong pondered. The Minister of Taxation asked, essential goods for daily life? Are those even available from other countries? Most high-quality goods are already produced here in Joseon. Yang responded quickly, Minister, are you familiar with pepper? The Minister of Public Works suddenly realized, that's right. I almost forgot about that. Yang sighed inwardly. He thought, people in this era don't realize how bland food is without pepper. We can only buy a small amount of pepper from Arab traders. That's why it's so expensive, Yang continued. A minister interjected. But do we really need to import it? If there's a problem, people might spend too much money. The nation's wealth could flow out. Yang replied, there is indeed that risk. However, if we blindly stop funding external trade, smuggling will increase instead. When that happens, people will pay even more and corruption will run rampant. Many will bribe officials to cover up the smuggling. Everyone present nodded in agreement. The more prosperous Joseon becomes, the better life will be for the people, right? Said one minister. Exactly, another replied. Yang then turned to the Minister of Taxation. What about the other goods I requested, aside from the books? The minister responded, those items are in the warehouse. Yang then asked his father, may I bring these goods to the Eastern Palace? King Sejong nodded in approval. Moments later, crates began being moved. Yang inspected each one. What's that? A minister asked as he saw Yang opening a crate. Yang answered promptly, this is the first item we will sell, sugar. The minister was shocked. Cane sugar? He recalled that his teacher had once mentioned that in the Joseon era, sugar was a valuable commodity. Growing sugarcane was extremely difficult. It was very expensive and considered a luxury. No wonder people here were astonished to see so much sugar. The ministers murmured among themselves, sugar is such an expensive item, and the crown prince has 20 full crates of it? With an annoyed expression, King Sejong spoke up. Crown Prince, Even though you are the heir to the throne, your lifestyle is quite extravagant. Yang looked at the Minister of Taxation and asked, "Does the inventory list include the prices? What was the total cost?" The Minister of Taxation checked the records. "Let's see. Sugar. Where is it? Sugar? What? 20 pure silver coins?" Everyone in the palace was stunned. King Sejong quickly asked, "Is there a mistake in the records?" The Minister of Taxation swallowed hard. Politely, he answered, "The total amount of sugar purchased was 800 kilograms, Your Majesty." Once again, the palace was filled with shock. A minister exclaimed in a trembling voice, "In the market, that amount of money wouldn't even buy a handful of sugar. How is this possible?" Yang recalled his teacher's words. If we closely examine Joseon's historical records, we'll see how strictly the kingdom isolated itself from the outside world. Our people don't even realize that the Ming dynasty has started mass-producing sugar. They produce so much that sugar is now considered a secondary commodity. Yang confidently continued, "That is why I was able to buy sugar at such a low price." The ministers gasped in surprise. "Oh, so that's how it is." King Sejong smiled proudly. "I am very proud of you. You are truly knowledgeable, worthy of being the crown prince." However, the Minister of Public Works suddenly raised an objection. "But we already have honey and grain syrup as substitutes for sugar. Therefore, we don't need to rely on foreign products." Another minister interrupted. "Your opinion is wrong. Honey is hard to find and grain syrup depends on the annual harvest. It's better to rely on stable foreign products." Sparks flew in their gazes. Another minister spoke up. "This isn't just about ease or difficulty. If we continue importing, won't Joseon become too dependent on foreign goods? Shouldn't we also consider smuggling?" Yang interrupted, "I want to ask the ministers. Has anyone ever tasted cane sugar before?" Everyone looked confused. One by one they began to respond. Some admitted they had tasted it once. Others had only tried it upon passing the state examination. Some had never tasted it at all. Yang let out a deep sigh and thought to himself, "Is our Joseon truly this poor?" King Sejong sharpened his hearing. "What did you say?" Yang quickly replied, "Nothing, father." Then he changed the topic. "I have a suggestion that I hope you will accept. Since we have just acquired a large quantity of sugar, why don't we distribute some to the officials and use it as gifts for the palace servants?" The ministers started murmuring. "Using sugar as a gift?" Yang nodded. "Yes. I believe it is important to recognize and appreciate those who have prioritized the nation above all else and dedicated themselves wholeheartedly." After hearing Yang's explanation, the ministers finally agreed. They also decided to sell the remaining stock of sugar. A few days later at the palace, King Sejong was leisurely enjoying sweets made from the newly acquired sugar. He looked very satisfied. Suddenly, Yang rushed in with a worried expression. "Father." King Sejong, who had not yet swallowed the sugar in his mouth, was startled. "Oh, Crown Prince, you're here." Seeing his father eating sugar again, Yang immediately frowned. "Father, you're eating sugar again? Look at your stomach, it's getting bigger." The king refused to back down. "I was just about to skip my dinner." Yang sighed and shook his head. "What if you get diabetes?" King Sejong exclaimed helplessly. "I already know that." The two were locked in their never-ending argument about the king's sugar addiction. At that moment, a voice from outside interrupted them. "Your Majesty, the ministers have arrived." They had no choice but to end their argument. The king signaled, then allowed them to enter. The door opened. 3 ministers slowly walked in, each moving with an air of authority. Their faces were serious. Their presence was unlike that of ordinary men. Yang turned to look at them, wondering, who are they? This is my first time meeting these people. As soon as the ministers arrived, the king began speaking. As you all know, the minister of the left recently retired to his hometown after the smallpox vaccination incident. Several high-ranking positions remain vacant. I have now made my decision regarding these appointments. The king continued, "This may be the first time the crown prince has met you all. So, why don't you introduce yourselves?" Yang looked at the man beside him. He wasn't sure who they were. The first man introduced himself. I am Sejong, the right state counselor. I am Hwang Hee, the left state counselor. I am Lee Jik, the chief state counselor. Upon hearing their introductions, Hyang was stunned. His emotions began to surge. This is insane. Could it really be them? He looked at the three men and thought to himself, they're really here. Overcome with excitement, he thought, if they are here, that means, who are they? How great are these three men? What role will they play in Joseon? Stay tuned for the next chapter. The scene opens by showing the gold pen used by Hyang in his study at the Eastern Palace. Hyang finished writing. He rolled up the paper and said, okay, it's done now. Hyang hurried to the Hall of Worthies. With a reassuring smile, he said, I'm going to greet you now, Jang Yang-sil. However, when he arrived at his destination, the person he was looking for wasn't there. Yang-sil was at the water clock. Hyang was startled and said, oh no. Kasim immediately offered to call Yang-sil, but Hyang paused for a moment and said, no. It's best we don't disturb him. Let's go to his place right away. Upon arriving at the water clock, Hyang examined the device and said, wow, it's huge. So this is a water clock from the early Joseon era. Hyang realized that the device was larger than he had imagined. Suddenly, he noticed someone behind him who looked confused. Hyang turned around and greeted, are you the royal advisor, Jang Yang-sil? The man replied, I humbly greet your highness, the crown prince. Hyang suggested that he need not be so modest. Then Hyang asked, I saw you were very agitated earlier. Is there a problem with the water clock? Yang-sil replied, yes, your highness. The king has ordered me to create a more accurate water clock. Although I understand its basic structure, I'm having trouble calculating all those numbers. Hyang smiled slightly, understanding Yang-sil's predicament. He proposed that they create a water clock that's smaller than the current one. Yang-sil said, I agree, but making one smaller than this I believe is impossible. Without waiting for a further response, Hyang immediately unrolled a scroll containing a new clock design and urged Yang-sil to take a look. Yang-sil unrolled the scroll and was astonished. In his heart, he hadn't expected someone so young to be capable of producing such a design. The design employed a pendulum for movement instead of water, and it even featured a gear wheel. Hyang thought, this design is too convincing. Noticing Yang-sil's expression, he asked, what do you think? With a trembling voice, Yang-sil replied, did you really come up with all of this on your own? Hyang answered, to be honest, 3 out of 10 parts of this design rely on Western knowledge. In his heart, Hyang thought, that's 100% knowledge from the 21st century where I come from. Hyang asked again, can you do it? Though hesitant, Yang-sil was eager to try. He hurried off to work on it and left Hyang behind. Suddenly, Yang-sil stopped and said, I think this will be difficult. At the moment, I'm under His Majesty the King's orders. I apologize, I'll make this clock afterward. Hyang frowned and said, I'll handle that for you. I'll complete my father's orders so that you can develop the clock I designed. Even though he feared being beheaded by the king if he did so, Hyang reassured Yang-sil not to worry. Seeing Yang-sil struggling to calculate all those numbers on his own, Hyang asked, do you know someone who's good at math? Yang-sil quickly replied, we have official John Cho from the Ministry of Public Works, official Zhang In-ji from the Hall of Worthies, and official Yi Cheon from the Ministry of Justice. Hyang understood every word and promised to resolve it so that Yang-sil could concentrate on researching the new clock concept. A short while later, the crown prince arrived at the palace. The king asked him, what brings you here? I have a request for your father. All the ministers wore worried expressions, for they knew that Hyang was renowned for his ideas that defied conventional logic in those times. Upon hearing Hyang's words, the king began to sweat and asked, what is your request? Hyang immediately replied, please assign some people for me. I need official John Cho from the Ministry of Public Works, official Zhang In-ji from the Hall of Worthies, and official Yi Cheon from the Ministry of Justice. In addition, I also require craftsmen from the armory and Yang-sil. Unsurprisingly, everyone mentioned was taken aback. Then one of the ministers began, Your Highness, those people? The king interrupted, why are you so surprised? Is there a problem with the people the Crown Prince mentioned? The minister explained, I apologize, but they are the finest talents in their respective departments. Without them, managing state affairs would be extremely difficult. Surely, Your Highness the Crown Prince needs them for something important, yet state matters are also crucial. Hearing this, the king turned to the Crown Prince and asked, Explain, why do you need them? The Crown Prince replied, I want to create an invention that will make Joseon rich and strong. The king inquired, An invention? Yes, the Crown Prince continued. I currently have a dozen designs in my study, though they only outline the basic structure. That's why I need the best arithmetic minds to calculate everything accurately. Besides, if we all work together, we can create a groundbreaking invention that will spearhead rapid progress in both the prosperity and military might of Joseon. The king responded, Is that truly what you desire? Inwardly, he wondered, what exactly is this kid planning to do? The next day at the Eastern Palace, everyone Hyang had summoned gathered and greeted one another. One of them asked Hyan, Did Your Highness the Crown Prince order you to make a clock? Hyan replied, Yes, while showing the scroll design created by Hyang, then proceeded to read from it. It appeared that the design employed a precise clock system to measure a full rotation of the Earth in one day. At that time, Joseon used an irregular timekeeping method, dividing the night into 5 segments rather than the 12 we recognize today. Not long after, the Crown Prince arrived carrying a sheet of paper in his arms. Everyone exclaimed, We pay our respects to Your Highness the Crown Prince. Yang said, The current method of timekeeping varies with the seasons. In my opinion, it's inefficient. For the sake of the people, wouldn't it be better to have a clock that's consistent in every season? One of them replied, Of course. But why have you summoned all of us here? Yang smiled broadly and said, I want all of you to solve this problem. Will they succeed in creating something revolutionary? What lies behind Hyang's smile? And what exactly is written on the sheet of paper carried by the Crown Prince? Stay tuned for the next chapter.